What's up guys, Asian here with a build video. Today we're going to be discussing the Stamina DK. Stamina DK has kind of become the so-called king of DPS, even among Stamina DPS, being touted as having a very simple rotation and being able to push out very high DPS nonetheless. So a lot of people are moving towards playing Stamina DKs. A lot of the endgame trials guilds are running 2 or 3 Stamina DKs in their group just because of their high DPS potential. So that's what we're going to be discussing today. Just like our other build videos, we're going to be going over gear, CP point distribution, abilities. We're going to be discussing our rotation, what abilities we use, what replacements you could have, why we do certain things, and then we're going to end things with a 6 million dummy par so you guys can get an idea of how the rotation works out in a more lengthy fight, as well as take a look at how sustain looks on the Stamina DK. So starting things off with our equipment, we are using 2-piece Velidreths, not Mephala. I've already talked about how Mephala and Velidreth stack up against each other. There is a video on that already on the theory crafting playlist. So we're using 1-piece medium and 1-piece heavy with a health enchant, and this is just to give me a little bit of extra padding when it comes to health. You can replace this with a medium piece, or you can replace the health enchant with a stamina enchant if you feel like you don't need that additional health. However, my Stam DK is one of the main tunes that I do bring into Vet Asylum with one of my raid guilds, so I do like to have a little bit of extra health there for Vet Asylum. So that's kind of why I have more health compared to stamina. For my 5-piece effect, 5-piece set I should say, I have Sunderflame. This is my primary debuff set. Stamina DKs typically wear Sunderflame. They can wear other debuff sets such as Morag Tong and Night Mother's Gaze, but Sunderflame is the one that Stam DKs typically go to, that and Morag Tong. If you're using Morag Tong, you typically are one of the 2 Stam DKs in the group, so that's kind of the 2 sets that you're probably going to see if you end up being a debuffer in your raid group. If you end up being the lucky one that manages to do basically 2 damage sets, then you can replace Sunderflame with something like Hundings or VO instead. For our second set, we're going to be using VO. We're going to be using weapon damage on all of our jewelry because Stamina DKs do run a heavy attack rotation, much like most of the other Stamina classes. So we don't really need any regen glyphs to help our sustain because our heavy attacks are going to be able to do that for us. We have 2 daggers of Vicious Ophidian. You can use Sunderflame if you'd like. It's really up to whichever weapons RNG decides to bless you with. I have Nirn with a poison damage enchant on our main hand and an infused weapon damage enchant on our offhand. This is the best combination of traits that I've managed to figure out through my testing. So I do have a video on how I've tested out all these different combinations of dual wield traits. That again is in my theory crafting channel if you want to take a look at that. And our offhand, our back bar, we have Maelstrom Bow, nirn with Double Ravage Health poisons. These poisons can be made using Fleshfly larva, Nightshade, and a nirn root. So they're pretty cheap ingredients, so there's really no reason not to run the Double Ravage Health poisons. Now, if you don't want to use poisons, you can stick with the standard Absorb Stamina enchant, or you can go with the Disease enchant if you would like. If you don't want to use poisons at all. If you are going to go with that, though, I would recommend swapping Nirn out for Infused. That probably won't be that big of a DPS loss, and you get a little bit of extra out of your enchants that way. So you can also use Sharpened on any of these. I would not recommend doing double Sharpened on your dual wield, but it is an option. But the thing with Sharpened is if using Sharpened puts you above penetration cap when your debuff sets are all active, it's going to end up being a DPS loss compared to a non-sharpened trait such as Nirn, Precise, Infused, things like that. So you're going to want to keep in mind your group, how much debuffs you have, how much penetration you have before you use a sharpened weapon on any bar. Remember that when you swap bars, any ground dots or single target dots, they all inherit the penetration of the bar you are on. So that's something that you also want to keep in mind as well. For our attributes, I have 60 into stamina and 4 into health. You can go all stamina if you'd like, but I like to have a little bit of extra padding because I primarily do Asylum with this tune. I am a vampire, and that's just a result of this tune also being my tanking tune. I do get 10% extra stamina regen and magic regen as well, but you don't have to be a vampire at all for stamina DPS. In fact, for beginner stamina DPS, I actually don't recommend being a vampire at all because you don't have as much reaction time and you do take additional damage from fire sources. So that's kind of play it however you'd like. If you want to be a vampire, go for it. If you don't, that's okay. You're not really going to be losing out too much because you are using a heavy attack build, so that extra 10% regen really isn't going to make or break your build. For our Mundus, we are using the Warrior. You can use the Lover for things like 4-man content and VMA stuff and solo content. It's not going to be as good in 12-man, again, because if you end up going over the penetration cap with the Lover, then you're losing out on DPS. So the Warrior is typically the best Mundus to use in 12-man content. Now I am a Dark Elf. Again, that's just kind of how it all rolls out. I prefer playing Dark Elves just for my own headcanon. So Dark Elves obviously aren't the best race for stamina DPS. If you want to truly min-max your stamina DPS, then your choice of race is going to be either Redguard, Khajiit. Those two are the best. Then you have other possible stamina DPS races. Dark Elves are not bad. They do get some 6% extra stamina. They do get additional flame damage. That does boost your Sunderflame a little bit, but not by much. Bosmer are another potential option. They get extra stamina and stamina regen. Orcs are another potential option as well for stamina DPS. But if you truly want to min-max, then Redguards or Khajiit are going to be the top 2 race choices there. For your ability bars, for our front bar we have Blood Craze, Venomous Claws, Noxious Breath, Deadly Cloak, Rearming Trap, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. We won't be using Flawless Dawnbreaker as our damage ultimate. This is going to be mainly there for our weapon damage boost. You get 7% when you have Flawless Dawnbreaker on your bar. And then for Blood Craze, you don't have to use Blood Craze. I like it for the additional heal over time. You can use the other morph, which is Rending Slashes. For our back bar, I have Echoing Vigor. You can use Resolving Vigor. Again, this is my tanking tune, so I have Echoing. Poison Injection, Endless Hail, Razor Caltrops. I actually have to take off Petrify and put in Molten Armaments, and Standard of Might. This is the ultimate that we're going to be using. You can use Ballista instead. The DPS difference is going to be pretty small between the two of them, but I like Standard of Might more because it does reduce the damage you take by 15%. It also increases the damage you deal by 15%, which is it's a pretty powerful buff. It also provides an additional synergy for people to use, like the tanks if they're using Alkosh. So Standard of Might is my go-to, but you can use Ballista if you want. You get more ultimates if you use Ballista, and because of Battle Roar, you get more resources back. I mean, you get less resources back, but you get them more often, so it's pretty much, and usually ends up being a wash in the end. Now for Echoing Vigor, you don't need to use Vigor. I like to have a self-heal on my bar in some cases when I would just want to maximize DPS. Instead of Vigor, I will put down Flames of Oblivion instead. So that's really up to you how you want to play it. I like having a self-heal on my bars, but if you want to go just pure DPS and you trust your healers to keep you alive, then you can swap this out with Flames of Oblivion, and your rotation is going to change a little bit, but not too much. Going over our CP point distribution now. So this is a tanking setup, so I am going to go into the redistribution so I can show you what it would look like otherwise. So this is what it would normally look like for CP point distribution. We have 75 into Mooncalf, 75 into Tenacity, 26 into Warlord, 26 into Tumbling, and 28 into Shadow Ward. You can actually split up your remaining 80 points however you'd like between those last three nodes. These two having 75 are the most important things though. Now for our Mage CP points, I have 34 into Master at Arms, 61 to Thaumaturge and Precise Strikes, 25 into piercing, and 49 into mighty. Now I want to take a moment to talk about piercing. So just like our discussion with lover and sharpened, you want to make sure you're not going over penetration cap when you have all your debuffs active. So you're going to want to take away from piercing or put into piercing depending on the buffs you get. So for the raid group that I run with, we normally have Night Mothers, Sunderflame, Infused Torag's Crusher, and Power of Delight. So that's where my 25 points into piercing comes from. So if we were using Alkash, I would actually be able to get rid of all my points from piercing and put them in elsewhere. So the most important thing to keep note of is regardless of whether you take points into or out of piercing, you're going to want to make sure to hit those jump points. If you have to put points out of other nodes and put them into piercing, take them out of Mastered Arms. Ideally, most of them are going to come out of Mastered Arms. If you have to take them out of these last 3 nodes, don't take them out of Mighty if you can help it. Instead, take them out of Thaumaturge and Precise Strikes at about equal amounts. So the next jump point would be 56, so you would try to get them both to 56 and put them into piercing if you can. But you want to avoid taking too many points out of Thaumaturge and Precise Strikes because those are actually pretty powerful passives for stamina DPS, particularly stamina DKs. For our red CPs, this is kind of one-size-fits-most distribution. Depending on the content you're going to run, your CP point distribution might vary a little bit. For example, in Maw, you might want some more points into Elemental Defender compared to Hardy, so kind of figure out what you're running and figure out if there is another CP distribution you can use. 61 to Ironclad, 1 into Spell Shield, 40 into Thick Skin, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that is that for CP. Now for our rotation. So rotation wise, it's going to be pretty simple. I'm going to kind of demonstrate it on the 3 million dummy for you guys, and then we're going to do our 6 million dummy parse. So before you start your rotation, you're obviously going to want to buff up with Molten Armaments. If you can, put on the Deadly Cloak so you have that up. But for our parse, I'm not actually going to buff up with Deadly Cloak beforehand, but you would in a raid before a boss fight. So you're going to buff up with Molten Armaments, drink your potion, and then actually don't use your ultimate right away. So what you're going to do is you're basically going to use all your dots on your bow bar, and then you're going to drop your ultimate like this. You're going to light weave into your first ability on your front bar. It could be Noxious Breath or Venomous Claws. I like Noxious Breath, but it can be either of them. Then you basically heavy attack weave through the rest of your abilities. You can light weave into Rearming Trap and then animation cancel like so. Then you want to animation cancel out of Caltrops. Make sure to hit your light weaves to get that Hawkeye up. Then you're going to want to rebuff with Molten Armaments every 20 seconds so you get that Minor Brutality buff. And that's basically it. Because DKs don't have an execute, you're basically going to continue to repeat this rotation throughout the fight, even towards the end. Because, again, you don't have an execute, so there's no need to change your rotation at all. And now I just gotta get my ultimate up for the actual parse. So, like I said, you don't actually want to have Molten Armaments run completely out before you rebuff it, because Minor Brutality, you get the Minor Brutality buff every 20 seconds, and Molten Armaments last for 40 seconds. You're going to want to rebuff it after every 20 seconds. So now we're going to do our actual parse. So, again, we're going to buff up first with Molten Armaments, and since this is a dummy parse, I'm not going to be buffing with Deadly Cloak initially. Drink our poison, drop our trap, put our dots down, and then use our ultimate. Now if you had Flames of Oblivion, you would use that typically after poison injection. So you need to light weave into Rearming Trap if you have used either your ultimate or Molten Armaments, but if you have not used Molten Armaments or your ultimate on your back bar, you can actually heavy weave into Rearming Trap like so. You don't have to do that, but if you're not a red guard, you're going to find that better for sustain. Otherwise, you're going to want to light weave into Rearming Trap and block cancel or swap cancel out of it. Because I am a Dark Elf, I do like to have that extra heavy attack, even though that is a general DPS loss, because I don't have the extra sustain that red guards, Khajiits, or Bosmer have. So our ultimate is up, and again, we're going to want to make sure all of our dots are running before we drop our standard in order to maximize that extra 15% damage boost from standard. So you can see that our sustain is fairly good because we are using a lot of heavy attacks. You should be getting anywhere between 2 and 4 heavy attacks in your front bar rotation. 2 is what I've seen said as the most efficient. 3 is best if you have sustain problems, or if you are basically a non-optimal class, you might need to use 4. So you can see here, since we don't have an execute, we're just going straight through with our rotation, no stopping. So that's our DPS on a 6 million dummy. I have done a little bit higher before, but around 37k is roughly what I sit at. So I can see here, Endless Hail and Razor Caltrops are our 2 top DPS contributors, followed by Venomous Claws and Poison Injection. Our heavy attacks combined also make up a good deal of DPS. So if you need to res somebody, or if you need to perform mechanics and break out of your rotation, these 3 or 4 dots are the ones that you're going to want to prioritize above all else. So, you know, let's say you have to res somebody, you're going to want to go to your bow bar and make sure to reapply those dots if they're about to run out. If you still have a couple of seconds left on them, make sure to have Venomous Claws up, maybe use a couple abilities on your front bar, but as soon as you see them start to run out, go back to your bow bar and basically refresh your rotation. Start from the beginning. Make sure to get all those dots off and then start over again. So that's kind of what you would need to do. And if you have to break out of your rotation for something like resing somebody, or you have to play mechanics or something like that. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys found it informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.